Okay, so what we're discussing over here about Mitzorah, and over here, interesting. The Torah tells us that what happens when the Mitzorah, the person who's in quarantine because of leprosy, and then he calls the kohen and says, "I think I'm clean," and the kohen comes out to the mechutz lamachana to where he's quarantined, and he sees v'hine nirpor negatz ras min etzarua. So he says that he's clean. So the kohen is going to declare him clean and allow him to come back into Klal Yisrael. When he comes back after 7 days with the event of what he's doing with the two birds, here the Torah says after he comes to the camp. He doesn't go into the camp. He stays outside his house for 7 days. And this is the point. And this is the discussion of today. On the seventh day, the Torah says Yigalach es kol sa'arai. The Torah tells us a Mitzorah has to take a haircut. Yigalach means to cut your hair with a hair instrument. That's what Yigalach is. But it doesn't say what instrument it is. So we know that the Al-Pi Kabbalah, without Pi Kabbalah, there was a tradition that it meant that he cuts his hair with a razor blade. It's not enough to cut it with a scissor. He has to cut his hair with a razor blade.
Galach means with a razor.
Yeah.
Galach means a razor blade. A bzit used to call it.
Yes, right. But it's not. You need a makar for that, because Yigalach. If we didn't have a makar that galach means a razor, I would think it means a scissors. And the Torah says this is hair, as roishai, the cup, vezakana is beard. He has to cut everything. So you see already extra words. If you're telling me he has to mamish cut all his hair on his body, it doesn't have to say his head, and it doesn't have to say his beard. So the Gemara is going to deal with these two words, roishai veskanai. Right? As kol sarei galech. So why does the Torah say his head and his beard? Now, so again, we're trying to find the source of where we know that the Mitzorah has to cut his hair with a razor blade. 2 more points. We know that you're not allowed to cut your beard. You're not allowed to cut your beard, and according with a razor blade. According to the Tanna Kama, the issa to use a big razor is on your face. According to the Tanna Kama, that's one. Not Rabbi Lezer, we're going to learn, holds that you're not allowed to use other instruments for your face. We'll learn about that in a moment. You're not allowed to use a tweezer. Then there's an inyan of what you're not allowed to cut the payas off. Here, that's very important to know. It's not just you can't cut your payas off with a razor blade. Even taking a very short haircut and cutting it down to the root is also usher, even if you're not using a razor blade, because you can't cut the payas. But that isser is not even, it's not with the razor blade. It could be even with anything. Okay, we're up to Daf Mem. Today's Daf is Daf Mem Mem and Mem Aleph, and we're going to start from Mem Amid Beis about 5 lines from the top. So we just get into it. It's very goes very fast. Amalahu hahu alibid rabbanan ha alibid rablaza. Rabbanan have a source of a pasuk that tells us by a Mitzorah, clearly by a Mitzorah he has to use a razor blade, and it's Rabbi Eliezer who we are searching for a source. The Tanah we learned in the Mishnah. The Torah, this Mishnah is discussing when do you liable for cutting your beard. So the Mishnah says you're not allowed to use a razor blade for your face, right? Rabbi Eliezer says he's more stricter. Afilu liktoi b'malkeit, even if you uproot the root, but not using a razor blade, use a tweezer. A tweezer is not necessarily something that you shave your face with, but because you're uprooting the root, Rabbi Eliezer hold it's included in the lav of not cutting your face, of your beard. Over a hitni. Hitni is a type of plane that's maybe used to even smooth wood. It's not something that you put on your face, but if you happen to have used this plane on your face, chayev. He holds you chayev, you're liable. So, but the Rab Tanakama holds Rabbi that what for your razor blade for your face. For your face, it has to be a razor blade for the avera. So the Gemara says, "My tamayu rabbanon." The question is, how do the rabbanon know? The question is, what is the reason? How do the rabbanon know that by a mitzora that he has to take a razor blade and razor blade his entire body? How do you know that? At the end of his tahara, the Tanya we learned in a brisa, zikonoi. There's an extra word, beard, that the mitzora, the Torah tells us, as we pointed out, that he has to shave off his beard after he finishes. But the question is, that's extra. Ma Talmud loima. Why does it say beard? It already tells me that as kol sa'arai yigaleach. Yigalech is kol sa'arai. On the seventh day, he has to cut off all his hair. So why does the Torah specifically say he should even cut his beard? Because the pasuk says, "Upas zakonam lo yigalecho." The Torah tells us that every person is not allowed to razor blade his face. Yochol afilu mitzora came. So I might think that even a mitzora should not razor blade his face because there's a law of razor blading your face. Talmud loima, from here we see Talmud loima. That's why the pasuk says zikonoi, that even a mitzora, a normal yid, is not allowed to razor blade his face, but a mitzora, as he's being mitar himself, he has to razor blade his face because we're going to say essay doicha lois essay. So now, so from that fact that the Torah told you that he should razor blade his face, it must be that a mitzora must use a razor blade. Because if the mitzora doesn't need a razor blade and he was not being over an isser razor blading his face, so the Torah doesn't have to tell you he's allowed to razor blade his face. He's not doing any avera by razor blading his face, by cutting his hair, because he doesn't have to use a razor blade. But if you tell me that no, that the mitzora needs a razor blade, then the Torah has to tell you specifically that it's permitted, even though he's being over razor blading his face. So from this is the source. It's like a logic question that you'd find on a test. This is the source because we have this riboy that tells you that the mitzora could cut his hair on his beard. It must be the Torah is telling you that normally he's doing something wrong. So why he's doing something wrong? Because the mitzora must use a razor blade. And if he must use a razor blade on your face is also. Now, that's the proof that the Rabbanan say that the Mitzora must use a razor blade. Now the question is, how do you know? And this is what we pointed out before. How do you know that you're not allowed to razor blade your face with a razor blade? Maybe the Torah says you're not allowed to cut your beard at all. Umanol the batar. How do you know that it's also to cut your beard with a razor blade? The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, upas zakonim lo yigalechu. You're not allowed to cut the corners of your beard. So yigalechu means, as we explained, the word yigalechu. Yeah, but it could mean anything that you cut hair with. So yochol, I might think you get an avera. I feel a gilchoy b'misparayim yehechayev. If you're going to cut your hair b'misparayim with a scissors, you'll be chayev. Talmud loim. Another pasuk says, don't destroy your hair of your beard. So what type of cutting hair instrument that actually uproots the roots of your hair in the face, that must be a razor blade. So it's taking together the word yigalechu and the word tashchis that indicates that the Torah was the isser of the Torah is only if you use a type of razor blade that uproots and destroys the hair. Yochel, I might think, I feel a likte b'malke would hit the yechayev. Here, the Gemara is asking, but maybe if I use an instrument that's not used for cutting hair, that's used for other instruments, but if I use it for pulling my hair out, I'll be chayev, like a tweezer or a plane, which is used to cut wood, to smooth wood. Maybe you'll be chayev. Talmud lo.
But if you cut hair.
Pasakonim lo yigalechu. You're not allowed to use a hair cutting instrument. So it has to be a hair cutting instrument that uproots the hair. Hakeitzad ezehu giluach sheyesh bo yashchasa. Which type of hair cutting instrument destroys? It's a razor blade. So clear, we know you're not allowed to use a razor blade on your face, and a Mitzvah must razor blade his beard when he's being Mitar himself. So the Gemara asks the question, how do you know? Umimai, how do I know that a Mitzvah is supposed to razor blade his face? The Gemara is going to ask, maybe the Torah says it's okay to use a razor blade, but he doesn't have to use a razor blade. That's the Gemara's question. Dilma, maybe a Mitzvah la'olam really afilu likte b'malkeit over a hitni, nami mitzvah covered. If the Mitzvah used something else, like a tweezers or a plane, he's also doing the mitzvah. And the pasuk is trying to tell you even with a razor blade, you don't get an avera, but you have to use a razor blade. How do you know that a Mitzvah must use a tar? How do you know that he must use the razor blade? So the Gemara says, Amri, so the Chachamim answered, no. If you think if you're going to say that if he uses a tweezer and a plane is also okay for a Nazir, then the Torah doesn't have to say that he could use a razor blade. If it's just an optional equipment that the Mitzvah can use, then it's obviously that he could use it. Lishtay kramine, then the Torah should be silent about that cutting your beard. Va'ano amina, and I certainly will say that he could certainly use a razor blade. Why? Because a Nazir, when he cuts his hair at the end of the Naziras, he doesn't cut his entire body, obviously. He only cuts his hair that he grew on his head. So the Nazir, the Torah says that he should use a razor blade. Now, to become a Nazir, somebody must have done an Aveira, the Isurika of it. The fact that you becoming a Nazir, you did an Aveira because you asked yourself on wine. And the Torah says, the Torah obligates the person, afila hachi mechayev. The Torah says that he's obligated to use a razor blade, and he's supposed to use the razor blade. So hacha, so over here, the mitzvah, that by the mitzvah, it's a mitzvah. In other words, even when somebody becomes a mitzvah, not because he did an avera. Sometimes you could become a mitzvah because your parents did an avera, as a boil nida or something like that. So you didn't do anything wrong. Now you're just doing the mitzvah of keeping the mitzvah halachos, and then you want to become clean. So you didn't do an avera to become a mitzvah, and now you're undoing yourself. Like koshkein, certainly you're allowed to use a razor blade. So this is like this is a question against that suggestion that the mitzvah doesn't have to use a razor blade. Then if he doesn't have to use a razor blade, I don't need a pasuk to tell me that he could use a razor blade because I'll figure that out on my own. And then we go to Mem Aleph and Mem Aleph. Vesu, and here's the main question. If you have a havamina that a mitzvah can use other instruments like a malket or a hitni, so that he could use those things. So like siftar, because the Torah didn't tell you to use a razor blade, the Torah didn't say anything. So if you tell me that he has an option to use something else, then he should be using something else. Because if he uses a tweezer, he's not being over an avera of cutting the beard. So if you have a choice to do a mitzvah saseh, and you could do it in a way that you're not going to be override a lav, by doing it in such a way by using a tweezer, and you have a way to use it to do the mitzvah by using a razor blade, but at the same time you're going to be over a lav, you're going to have to go on to essay doichelois essay. The Rosh Lakish came up with a novelty and said you should not choose to do it using the avera. Use it the thing that is not going to be an avera. So therefore, you would never be able to use a tar because you have other things to do. The Amar Rosh Lakish says, "Call Mokom any place. If you have an essay and a lois essay. So if you can keep both, that means you have a mitzvah essay versus a mitzvah lois essay. So if it's possible to do both, let's say you have a bris milah to do, and there's a neged saras on the bris milah. If there's a way to do the bris milah without cutting off the neged saras, mutav, then do it. You're not allowed to just cut off the neged saras. You have to do the bris milah and avoid the neged saras because you don't have to do it. But in lav, but if that's not the case, yave essay, then we say an essay comes v'yitcha es lois essay, like an essay should override the lois essay. So over here, if it's true that a mitzvah can use other non-hair cutting equipment to be Mekayim the mitzvah, then we would not allow him to use a tar, because by using a tar, he's over an avera at the same time, and you have to come on to essay overriding a loisa say. So the fact that the Torah goes out of its way and tells the Mitzorah, cut your beard, because the Torah is aware that the only thing that the Torah wants you to use is a razor blade, is a tar. And by cutting your beard, you're going to be over an avera. And here the Torah is telling you, yes, you could only use a tar, and you must say, essay should be doichet loisa say. So a bottom line is, Rabbanan know that a Mitzorah uses a razor blade from the extra word zekanoi. The Torah tells you that he has to cut his beard. Rabbi Lezer, let's think about Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Lezer says even cutting your beard with any type of equipment is usher. Right? He holds that any type of equipment is usher. Anytime you cut your beard and you're uprooting the roots, even if you're using a tweezer, you're over. So therefore, he needs Zakanai to teach you that even if you're going to be using a tweezer, the Mitzorah should be cutting his beard. So how does he know? How does Rabbi Lezer know that the Torah does not want a Mitzorah to use a tweezer? The Torah wants him to use a razor blade. So my timer, how does Rabbi Lezer know that you use a razor blade? Yalef Miraishai. There's another extra word in that pasuk. The Torah says that the Mitzorah should cut his hair on his body. And then the Torah says the hair on his head and the hair on his beard. Why does the Torah tell you that he has to cut the hair on his head? It's extra. Teaches you, the Tanya we learned in the Brisa. Why does the Torah tell you that you should cut the hair on your head? Because Lefi Shenema, now we have to go, when is it usher for a person to cut his payas with a razor blade? It's only usher if to cut. When is it usher to cut your hair on your head, not your payas, but the hair on your head with a razor blade? If you're a nazir, the pasuk says "Gabay nazir." If someone makes himself a nazir, ta'ar loyava al roishay. He's not on his head with a razor blade. Yochol, I might think af nazir mitzorah came that if a nazir who became a mitzorah also, and now he's coming to be mitar himself from being a mitzorah, he also should not be cutting his head because he's not going to use a razor blade. Talmud loima roishai. That's why the Torah says, no, you're doing something wrong. I know you're doing something wrong, but I want you as a mitzorah to override that, cut your head with a razor blade, even though I know you're a nazir. So the Gemara says, Mimai, how do you know? Maybe it's a choice. The same question that we asked before. Maybe a mitzorah has an option to use any type of tweezer or a plane, and he gets the mitzvah. And then why did the Torah say roishai? That you should. What is the Torah teaching you with roishai? That if he wants, he could use a razor blade, but he doesn't have to. So, because I would have thought, because if the nazir, if you use a razor blade, he gets an avera. So even when I'm a nazir who is a mitzorah would also get an avera if he cuts his head with a razor blade. Kamash Lam, the law, he doesn't get an avera, but nevertheless, it's not the obligation. He has a choice. The one of the three choices to use is a razor blade or a tweezer or a plane. So how do you know it's exact that the Torah wants him to use a razor blade? So the Gemara answers the same answer. If you want to say that if he uses a malkik and a rehitne, if he uses a tweezer, he's still getting the mitzvah, because it doesn't say the word that he should use a razor blade, then Kirish Lakish. Then we should go like Rish Lakish would tell us he should never use a razor blade. Why? Because you have a way to do the mitzvah without being over the loisa say of using a razor blade. Use a malkik or a hitne. But the fact that the Torah goes out of its way and says that you can use a razor blade, it must be the Torah is telling you that you must use a razor blade. And even though you're a nazir, and a nazir cannot cut his hair with a razor blade, here, if a nazir became a mitzorah, the Torah is telling you he should cut his hair with a razor blade. So we have two sources. Bottom line, way to remember it. Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that you're never allowed to, you're not allowed to cut your beard with any type of instrument, even any type of cutting instrument, even if it's not a a razor blade, he learns that a Mitzaira has to use a razor blade from the word Roishai. The Rabbanan use the word Zakanai, beard, to teach you, the extra word beard, to teach you that a Mitzaira must use a razor blade. So now the Gemara says, Rabbanan. The Rabbanan that use the word beard to teach you that a Mitzaira must use a razor blade, what did they do with the extra word Hai Roishai Mai Darshabei? What did they do with the extra word Roishai in the pasuk? So the Gemara is saying, the Rabbanan needed you limitche lav the hakafa, that the Mitzaira should override the lav of cutting the payas. The Tanya we learned in a brisa. The Torah tells us that every Jew loisakifa paas roishchem. The Torah, you're now allowed to circle off the corners of your head. You cut it off. So I might think yochal af Mitzaira came, that the Mitzaira should not cut the corners of his head. And when the Torah says he should cut all the hairs of his body, it means not the payas. Talmud Loimer Roishai, the Torah is telling you Roishai, he must cut his payas off. So now that's the Gemara's question. So now the Gemara asks another question. So what is the point of this mitzvah? The mitzvah tells you that essay doiche loisase. So the Gemara's question is, Lama li lemichtav Roishai, why did the Torah tell you that the mitzvah say for Mitzaira to take a haircut overrides the loisase of loy takifu? The fact is that we know that this mitzvah say overrides a loisase because the Torah tells us that he should cut his beard off. The Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Zakona my Talmud Loima. Why does the Torah tell us that he should cut his beard off? He's not allowed to raise a blade his beard. Yochalach Mitzaira came, Talmud Loima Zakonai. So the question is, Lama li lemichtav Roishai, v'lama li lemichtav Zakonai. According to Rabbanan, why do I need two psukim to teach me that an essay of Mitzaira should override the avera of cutting your payas and cutting your beard? Certainly, essay doichelois essay. You just teach me once, and I know, and I'll extend it to the other lavim of cutting hair on your head. And says the Gemara, tzrichi, I need both. The Torah tells us that a Mitzaira should cut his beard, and he's supposed to cut his payas. The Iksav Rachmana Zakan, if the Torah would have written that beard, Veloikas of Roishai, and the Torah would have not written that he should cut his payas. Havamina, I would have thought that he could cut his payas because he's not being over an avera by cutting his payas. Because when you over an avera cutting your payas, if you cut the payas and you make a mushroom like your machshamam Hitler and Himmler, your machshamam. So all the Nazis, they cut all the hair all around and left the mushroom. So then that's the Issa Daraisa. But here you're not being over an avera because the Torah is telling you cut all your hair off so make yourself like a baldy. I would think hakafas kol roish, if you bald your entire head, loishma kafa, you weren't over the avera. Lahachi kasur rachman roishai. That's why the Torah says roishai, to teach you that when a Mitzaira is cutting his head off, cutting his hair on all the hair on his head, he's still being over an avera of cutting the payas off, despite the fact that he's making himself totally bald on the head. So it's not just cutting the payas off, but even if you decide to bald your head and it's not like a round circle, you're just totally bald, you're still over the avera of hakafa, and that's the of loisakifu, and that is the chiddush of the pasuk. When we go to Mem Aleph and Beis, very short daf, because so now I need roishai to teach you a din in hakafas kol roish shma hakafa. Because of roishai, but like of zakana, if the Torah would only write that the Mitzaira should cut his payas off, but not to cut his beard off, I wouldn't extend it. Have a mashma tarte. I would have said you're right that the Mitzaira, you see two things from that pasuk of Roishai. The essay of Mitzaira, the doches loisase, overrides the loisase of not cutting your payas off. That I see from that Roishai. Umashmena also will teach me that hakafas kol roish ma hakafa, that he's doing something wrong by cutting it off. Even if a person cuts off all his hair on his head, he's still over the avera of cutting payas. So the Mitzaira is really doing an avera of cutting off all his hair, and yet the Torah says, I'm giving you a mitzvah saseh to override that loisaseh. But so I would hear those two things. But how do I know if Torah must use a razor blade? Because to cut your hair off, to get the avera of cutting payas off, you don't need a razor blade. You get the avera off even if I use a close electric shaver that cuts very close to the head, you would still get an avera. So how would I know that a Mitzaira must use a razor blade? That's why the Torah wrote beard, the beard piece to teach you that the Mitzvah must use a razor blade. And therefore, because the Torah tells you he's using a razor blade, and the Torah says cut the beard off, it must be you're doing an Avera by cutting your beard off, because you're not allowed to cut your beard with a razor blade. And the Torah says, I want you to cut it off. So we see that the whole concept that the Mitzvah only must use a razor blade. Now the question is one last question, and we'll end. But Rabbi Lazar,
It says, Vayagalaychi is a razor blade.
yes.
It says, Vayagalaychi. Vayagalaychi means a razor blade. You shouldn't do it.
Not right. Yeah, but together with loisashchis, Yagalaychi means a razor blade. You're right. In the Mitzvah, it says Yagalach, but Yagalach does not mean a razor blade by itself. By the Burj, Shtait Nocha Pusik, as loisashchis pasukah necha. You can't destroy. So a type of cutting that destroys is a razor blade. But here, by Mitzvah, the Torah just says cut it off with something that cuts hair off. But the Torah doesn't say gul meser. So there we have to know extra words of konai to teach you that a Mitzvah must use a gul meser. But Rabbi Lazar, who used Roshai to teach you that the Mitzvah uses a razor blade. So and he uses Raishai to teach you to use a razor blade. In Zakana he needs already, because you're doing an Avera anyway, because you're doing an Avera anyway. So the Ase Essay V'Dochas Loisa Se Minole. How does Rabbi Lezer know the concept of Essay Doicher Loisa Se? Yalaf Mikadilim. He learns it out from Tzitzis. The Tanya we learned in the Braisa. The loisil b'shatnus. The Torah says don't wear shatnus. So that means you're not allowed to put, if you have a linen beged, a linen garment, you're not allowed to put wool tzitzis, I would think. So, but then the Torah says, we go to Daf Membeis, Hagedilim Tasalachoch. You can make tzitzis from them, which means that the Torah is telling you that tzitzis overrides the mitzvah overrides the avera of this. That even since the tchelis, the blue wool is one tzitzis is made out of blue wool, the Torah is telling you that even if you have a beged made out of linen and the strings are going to be made out of wool, the mitzvahs of tzitzis overrides the avera shatnez. So that's how the source of essay doichel essay was, according to Rabbi Lezer, learned from somewhere else, not from the mitzvah of B'tsoira taking a haircut. It's learned from tzitzis. Okay.
Beautiful. Very nice.
Okay.